Hello, everyone. Gender transformation in the medieval world wasn't always what we imagine today. The truth was often far more complex and far more tragic. This is a story that may quietly steal your tears before you even realize it. So, dear listener, are you ready now for a journey soft as silk, yet sorrowed? A love so pure, the world could not protect it from the hands of kings? Let us return to a quiet village, where two hearts once beat in rhythm. Lin and Ara were born days apart. They grew up like twin blades of grass. Each morning, they greeted the same sky. Each night, they heard the same owls. They fetched water together from the stream, shared bread, stole pears, and told stories. They fought once over a broken comb, but apologized before the sun had set. By 16, love had crept between them. It wasn't loud, but it was true. A glance from her made Lin silent. A touch from him made Ara tremble. They never spoke of marriage or vows. They simply belonged, like wind to leaves. Under the rain tree, they always met. Some days they talked, some days not. Their favorite place was a low ridge, where the village disappeared behind tall grass. From there, the world seemed far away, and so did war and kings and pain. But peace, as we know, is fragile. It vanishes before we even notice. That spring, whispers came from traveling merchants. The queen was dead. The court was restless. Some said a prince had been banished. Others said the stars spoke of blood. Lin didn't care, nor did Ara. What mattered was the slow quiet now. They watched dragonflies. They braided reeds. They counted clouds as they held hands. Then the riders came, 3 in blue. Their horses were lean, eyes sharp with dust. Their scroll bore a red wax seal. The village elders read it with dread. The king seeks boys of calm presence, unmarried, strong, silent, fit for sacred duty. No reason was given. None was needed. Lin's name was called before the third. Ara froze, her sewing needle shaking. Lin didn't speak. He simply looked down. His hands trembled, but he stepped forward. That night, they met again by water. The stream was quiet. So were they. "I don't want you to go," she said. "I must," he answered, "but I'll return." They pressed their foreheads close and breathed. She placed a red thread in his hand. "For luck," she whispered, "and for memory." He left at dawn. No farewell party. His father gave him a silent nod. His mother held back tears with bread. Ara stood far off, arms wrapped tight. Days passed. Then weeks. Then months. The rain tree bloomed, but he was gone. Ara still sat beneath it sometimes, fingering the empty threads of old promises. Her parents said nothing. Neither did she. But her eyes dimmed, her voice thinned. The world moved. People forgot. She didn't. She stitched garments, cleaned roots, and waited. Then, one dusk, the blue men returned. Again, they carried a scroll and silence. The elders gathered. The names were few. Ara's name was spoken first and firm. This time the summons bore a seal, the mark of queenship, golden bird crest. The king had chosen her for his house, not as a servant, as a wife. She dropped the bowl she was holding. Water spilled across her calloused feet. Her mother gasped. Her father said nothing. That night she packed without a word. 2 robes, her wooden comb, Lin's flute. She had once laughed at his clumsy tunes. Now she held it like a relic. As the ox cart creaked from the gate, no one waved, no one cried aloud. Ara looked forward, never behind again. The palace was vast, full of marble. Voices echoed through golden domes and pillars. Her chamber was large, draped in red, but she felt smaller than ever before. She learned to bow, walk, smile faintly, to listen, answer, and never speak first, to sleep with eyes half open in dread. Days blurred into silken hours of stillness. Then, one evening, she saw him again. He was standing by the fountain's edge, white robes flowing, hands folded, head bowed. He looked older, paler, unreachable now, but the tilt of his brow. Lin. She stepped forward, breath caught in ribs. He turned, slowly, like hearing wind. For a second, the world stopped spinning, but he did not smile, nor speak. They passed each other like strangers do, but her hands trembled for hours after, and his lips, once quiet, now shook. In the garden of still shadows and gold, two souls moved through silence and distance, each wondering if love had truly died or simply been renamed by royal will. And so, dear listener, here we begin, not with death, but with slow unraveling, not with swords, but with broken promises, a story of two hearts in exile. Let the pages turn slowly. Let us remember. Some stories do not roar, they whisper. He no longer answered to Lin. That name, once warm, had been erased. In the palace, he was White Orchid, a title as delicate as it sounded. He wore it like silk on bare skin, elegant, cool, and stitched by strangers. His duties were many, but always quiet. Silence was the rule. Emotion, a threat. He served the queen's tea without a tremble. He arranged scrolls, trimmed candles, folded robes. He moved like water over smooth stone, present, unnoticed, impossible to hold. In the hall of morning incense, he memorized footsteps before they arrived. He knew which princess walked with pride and which noble hid pain in lace. He never spoke of his village life, never once said the name Ara, but her image lingered in his mind like steam on polished bronze, sought persistent. He thought of her in pauses between bells, in the flutter of sleeves against his wrist, in the soft tremble of spring plum petals falling into the garden's white stone path. Each night he sat by a pond. It had no name, just stillness. He watched moonlight pool on water and wondered if she looked up too. Then came the whispers through the walls. The king had taken a new bride, from the countryside, from a willow grove. He stopped breathing for a single moment. Could it be? Could fate be so cruel? He rose too quickly, spilled a cup. A senior eunuch struck him across the face. He bowed, apologized, and said nothing more. That evening, he saw her by accident. She passed through the red fan courtyard, her steps unsure beneath golden silk. Her hair was tied in court fashion, but her eyes, those eyes were Ara's. He hid behind a stone column, watching. She did not see him. Or perhaps she did, and chose not to react. Either way, the silence screamed between them. He returned to his quarters and wept, but not loudly, not visibly, not fully. There was no space for mourning here, only quiet breathing and folded pain. The next morning, he resumed his duties. He poured tea. He knelt in corners. But he carried her in every motion. Every ribbon he tied. Remembered her laughter. Ara, meanwhile, was learning to forget, or at least to pretend she had. Her days began with incense and instructions. Which words to say, when to smile. She wore heavy robes with tighter shoes. She learned the names of 20 concubines. Some were kind, some cold, all watching. No one dared speak the truth aloud, but each girl carried her own secret. Some had lost homes, lovers, even children. All had been chosen. None had asked. At night, Ara stared at the ceiling. She thought of rain on old rooftops, of stolen peaches, and the sound of Lin's voice calling her from the stream. And then, she saw him. Not fully. Only his back in the garden mist. But she knew that posture, that stillness. She stepped forward, heart racing too fast. "Lin," she whispered, almost a prayer. He turned. Their eyes locked like stormlight. But nothing was said. Nothing could be. The walls had too many ears. He bowed slightly, as custom demanded. She froze, hands shaking in her sleeves. He passed her like a winter breeze, chilling, familiar, and gone too soon. The next day, she wandered the garden. Each step a question. Each breath heavy. She hoped to see him again. But the corridors remained empty, unmoved. One night she wrote on silk paper, just 3 words. "Do you remember?" She hid the note beneath a bench beside the pond where he once sat. For days she waited. No reply came. She returned. The note was gone. In its place, a red thread lay, the same she once gave him long ago. Tears welled in her eyes but didn't fall. Even sorrow had to remain silent. Later that week they passed again, in a narrow hall behind the kitchen. He glanced once, then looked away. But she saw, his fingers clenched tight. He was still in there. Still Lin. Changed, shaped, silenced, but not erased. And she, still Ara, still burning, still holding on to something half forbidden. In the garden without a name, 2 hearts began to whisper again. Not with words, but with memory. Not with touch, but with nearness. They spoke in glances across open courtyards, in footsteps timed to match one another, in red threads tucked between scrolls. They never met in full again. Not yet. The walls were too close. The king's gaze, too wide and sharp. But hope, quiet, trembling, resilient, began to grow like moss in shade. Slowly, secretly, with no promise of bloom. And for the first time in many months, Ara smiled without knowing she had. White Orchid hummed an old village tune, and above them both, in quiet moonlight, the rain tree bloomed, far away, but never truly out of reach. They used to call her Ara. Now she was 3rd wife of spring. No one asked her what she preferred. No one cared who she had been. In the palace, names were like rain. They fell, disappeared, and never returned. Girls arrived with names and lost them. Boys arrived with names and lost more. She repeated her title in the mirror, practicing how to smile when addressed. It sounded beautiful, but felt hollow, like a vase with no water inside. She no longer stitched by the window. Needles reminded her of her village. Instead, she wandered the moonlit gardens, hoping to see him once again. White Orchid still served in silence. He moved like shadow through marble halls. But now, when his sleeve brushed hers, she noticed the pause, that tiny tremble. They never spoke. That was the rule. But rules had cracks if one listened. A misplaced scroll, a thread on stone, a half-folded robe with a secret knot. And so, in silence, they built something. Not a house, not a future, just a space where memory stayed alive. He once slipped a plum into her tray. Dried, sweet, just like those from home. She nearly cried, but only blinked. Even joy had to be hidden here. She wanted to ask, "Are you well?" But even the thought felt too loud. So she wrote questions on fallen petals, then let the wind scatter them wide. One night she passed him in twilight. He bowed, as always, low and still. But this time, as she turned away, He let a single word escape. Ara, just that. Soft. Barely there. But she heard it. Oh, she heard. Her breath caught. Her heart stopped, fluttered. She turned, but he was already gone. She held the word in her hands, cradled it like a newborn bird. It was the first time in months someone had called her by her name. That night, she couldn't sleep at all. She touched the flute he once held, and remembered when it sounded like laughter. In the eunuch's quarters, White Orchid lay awake. He repeated her name like a prayer, not loud, not hopeful, just real. He had not said it by accident. He knew the risk and took it. He needed her to remember, too. But the palace listened. Always, always listened. Walls had ears, floors had loyal feet. Servants were not friends. Eyes watched everything. One older eunuch, sharp and cold, began to notice the silent glances. He followed. He waited. He questioned nothing, just reported in silence when needed. One morning, White Orchid was reassigned. No reason given, no protest allowed. He was sent to the lantern towers, farther from the queen's living quarters. When Ara learned, her hands trembled. She burned her embroidery by mistake. A servant asked if she was ill. She smiled and said she was tired. She did not see him for days. Not in gardens, not by the pond, not in hallways. Even when she wandered, she feared he had been punished deeply. She feared worse, that he was gone. But one afternoon, near a paper lantern, she found a folded note in red. Pressed between its creases was a thread. The same thread she once gave him. The note said nothing. It didn't need to. It was a heartbeat, passed by paper. Proof he was still near, still present, still whispering without sound across stone. Hope returned, quieter than before. It didn't sing. It just breathed slow. She learned to smile without trembling again, to answer questions without drifting away. White Orchid lit lanterns and cleaned brass. He walked stairs all day, every day. But he found meaning in little things. A jasmine bloom, a cracked teacup. Everywhere, he looked for signs of her. Sometimes she left ribbons on benches. Other times, words carved tiny on wood. I miss the river. Do you? He'd answer with folded leaves shaped like boats. Little bark ships like their childhood ones. He placed them by the water basin. She always found them, always noticed. But love cannot live in shadows forever. And not all silence remains safe long. The king was not blind to unrest, nor were his spies deaf to whispers. One morning, all wives were summoned early. The king sat silent in his throne. He eyed them one by one, slowly. His gaze paused longer on Ara's face. She lowered her eyes, pulse heavy, shaking. He said nothing, but his silence thundered. That night, she was not summoned near, but she did not sleep in peace. White Orchid heard the news from whispers. He knew what silence from power meant. He left a note beneath her pillow. Be careful. They know. Say nothing more. She read it in the dim moonlight, then burned it before dawn could rise. But her heart beat loud all day. Their secret space, once soft and sacred, now felt cracked, uncertain, dangerous again. But even fear could not erase feeling. Even danger could not unname love. They did not stop. They only paused, waited for wind to calm its breath. They learned the rhythm of quiet resistance, of holding on with hands unseen. And though no one said the word love, it pulsed between them like shared fire. Not bright enough to be seen yet, but hot enough to keep the soul warm. So she smiled at lanterns, not people, and he folded threads into temple cloth. And far beneath the stone and gold, their names still whispered, soft but unbroken. The summons came with no warning at all. A servant whispered near the paper screens, then bowed and waited without lifting eyes. Ara stood slowly, heart pounding inside silence. She smoothed her sleeves with trembling hands. The other wives did not speak. They simply looked down, then looked away. She followed the servant through long corridors. Marble echoed beneath her quiet footsteps. Outside, bells rang for evening prayer. Inside, every breath felt carved from glass. They led her to the bathing chamber. Steam curled from basins filled with rose water. 2 attendants helped her disrobe in silence. They did not smile. They never did. She stood bare in a room of mirrors, her skin shivering though the air was warm. They poured water gently over her shoulders, combed her hair with sandalwood oil. The silk robe was heavier than expected. Red with gold lining, embroidered with dragons. It clung to her in unfamiliar places. Its folds whispered as she moved forward. She was led to a narrow hallway, then left alone beside an ivory door. She could hear nothing from within. No footsteps, no speech. Only waiting. Her hands folded against her stomach tightly. Her breath slowed until it nearly vanished. She felt like paper pressed between stones, not crushed, not free, something in between. The door opened. A eunuch appeared. His face blank, his gesture slow. He stepped aside. She stepped inside. And the door closed softly behind her. The chamber was dim and scented with myrrh. Candles flickered in lotus-shaped brass holders. Thick curtains hung from the carved ceiling. A single carpet stretched beneath her feet. The king sat at the far end, cloaked in silk darker than nightfall. He did not speak. He simply watched. She bowed, then knelt as instructed before. He rose and approached with unhurried grace. His hands were clasped behind his back. He circled her once, then again, like a painter studying unfinished canvas. "You are quiet," he said at last. His voice was low, smooth as oil. She said nothing. That was safest now. He reached down and lifted her chin. Not roughly, not gently, just deliberately. Their eyes met. She did not blink. "You do not tremble like the others." "I do," she said softly. "Just inside." A faint smile touched the king's mouth. Then he turned and walked to the window. Moonlight streamed in, cold and silver. He folded his hands behind his back. "You came from the Willow Village, yes?" "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered carefully. "I've seen many from there before." He paused. "They burn quietly, like incense." She said nothing. She had no words. He did not ask her to rise. He did not summon the musicians tonight. No wine was poured. No laughter echoed. He simply stood in moonlight and stared. Then, at last, waved his hand once, a signal. The eunuch re-entered in silence. The chamber did not feel cold, but Ara could not stop shaking inside. Her body stayed still. But her breath, it quivered with each new unspoken question. The robe's weight grew heavier with time. She did not know how long passed, only that it felt like years. And when she stood, her knees ached. Back in her quarters, she did not speak. Her handmaid said nothing, only lit incense. The smoke curled above them, soft and slow. Ara undressed alone, folded the red robe. She placed it at the foot of bed, as if it might wake and speak. Then she sat and stared at nothing. She remembered the river's smell at dusk. Lin's hands cupped around drifting fireflies, the feeling of belonging with no weight. Now everything she wore had edges, and every word she said had risk. Outside, the wind stirred garden leaves. Somewhere, someone was laughing far away. She envied them, not for their joy, but for their ignorance of this place. She opened the wooden box beneath her bed. Inside lay 3 folded paper birds. She took one and whispered to it. "Tell no one what happened tonight." The bird said nothing, as always. She placed it on the sill to sleep. It watched the stars, silent and loyal. Meanwhile, in the high lantern tower, White Orchid finished oiling the final wick. He descended the stairs with careful steps, hands tucked in sleeves, face unreadable. But his heart beat faster than usual. He had felt something shift in wind, something subtle, something deeply familiar. He passed a servant bearing the red robe. He did not turn. He did not ask. But the embroidery, he knew that pattern. The thread was hers. He felt it. That night, he walked the palace edge. By the walls where moss clung quietly, he pressed his fingers against stone, breathing slowly. "She has seen him," he murmured softly. "Let her still be whole. Please, still whole." His words dissolved into the night air. No answer came, but he stayed there, just breathing, just being, just remembering. In the days that followed, she changed. Not visibly, not enough to cause alarm, but her hands moved slower with thread. Her smiles reached only halfway to her eyes. She laughed when asked, ate when told, but her mind walked elsewhere each night. White Orchid noticed in the way she blinked, the way she paused before sipping tea, the way she stared into still fountains. He left no notes, no gifts. Not now, not when eyes were watching. But he knelt longer during evening duties. He lit her lantern with both hands. He folded towels a little more gently. And she looked at him again. Not long, not dangerously, just enough. Enough to remind them both, we're still here. In a world that renamed them both, they still carried the truth deep within. He was still Lin. She was still Ara. And the weight of silk could not bury a name whispered from the heart. The moon gate stood in the garden, a stone arch carved with swirling clouds. It led nowhere special, just a path between 2 groves of flowering plum. But at night, under quiet candle stars, it became a place between 2 worlds, between memory and duty, silence and longing, between who they were and who remained. White Orchid passed it every 5th night. He always slowed his steps at dusk, eyes brushing the gate, but never stopping. He wondered if she still remembered it. Ara had seen it too. In dreams. In quiet hours when silk grew heavy and words lost meaning in chamber walls. She imagined him standing beneath that arch, waiting for her without expectation or fear. So one evening, she left early. Claiming a headache, she dismissed her maids, slipped through the courtyard shadows alone. The lanterns along the path were dim. The wind was soft and carried jasmine. She walked slowly, as if afraid the earth might hear her hope rising. When she reached the gate, he was there, already waiting, already silent, already trembling. Neither moved. For a long moment, they stood facing each other like ghosts, half-dreamt, half-remembered, almost real again. Then, wordlessly, she stepped forward once, and he did too. Just one step. Close enough to feel warmth, not touch, close enough to remember everything at once. "You're thinner," she said, voice barely audible. "You're quieter," he replied, eyes still lowered. They both smiled, just slightly, just enough. "I thought they had punished you," she said. "They did, but not the worst." He paused, then added, "Not yet." She looked at the stone beneath them. "The king called me last week," she whispered. He looked up. The words struck deep. "I know," he said. "I saw the robe." They said nothing for a long time, but the silence between them wasn't empty. It held pain, yes, but also love. "I'm afraid," she said, touching her wrist. "Not of him, of forgetting who I am." "You haven't," he said. "Not to me." She closed her eyes. One tear escaped. He did not touch it. He couldn't. But he leaned forward, just slightly closer. "I still remember your flute," she said. He laughed, quietly, unexpectedly, sadly. I never learned to play it right. You didn't need to, she smiled faintly. It was enough just to hear it. The plum blossoms shifted with the wind. A petal landed on her shoulder. He reached to brush it away, then froze, fingers hovering in the air. I want to hold your hand, he said. I want that more than anything. She looked at him. Then do it. But he didn't. He couldn't. He knew. To touch you is to lose everything, he whispered, voice dry as wind. They would take you away. Or worse. Then let me be the one afraid, she said. Just once. Let me choose. Still, he dropped his hand slowly. Instead, he knelt before her, head bowed. Not as a servant, not in duty, but as a boy who once loved. She knelt too, facing him in silence. They breathed the same breath, same night. Around them, the palace faded away. There were no guards, no stone walls, just two hearts echoing an old rhythm. Say it again, she whispered. He looked up, confused. My name, she said. Say it again, Ara. This time, he said it without fear. She smiled. A real smile, slow and soft. Then she leaned forward, not quite touching. Her forehead met his, gently, like prayer. They stayed like that, eyes closed, still. No kiss, no tears, just being near. Somewhere far, a bell marked midnight. They stood slowly, shoulders brushing by accident. Neither stepped back. Neither apologized for closeness. I'll come again, she said, voice firm. He nodded. Not too often. Be careful. I'm tired of being careful, she said. But I will. For you. He bowed, as was expected of him. But this time he added something else, a small, folded slip of parchment. He pressed it into her sleeve discreetly. She did not check it yet, only held it close as they parted. She left first, steps measured and slow. He watched until she disappeared behind trees. Then he turned toward the gate again, looked up at the sky in silence. One star twinkled, then vanished behind cloud. He wondered if it too had a name. Back in her chamber, Ara lit a candle. She unfolded the parchment with quiet care. 3 words written in small, neat ink. You are still mine. She pressed the paper to her lips, then tucked it beneath her pillow gently. That night, she slept without fear. In the days that followed, they waited. Not for meetings, but for signs. A branch placed sideways on a ledge, a cup turned the wrong direction, a yellow petal folded in half. These were their words now, soft signs. Their language was shaped in shadows, but filled with truth no court could break. They did not plan escape. Not yet. Nor speak of futures too distant. For now, being near was enough. For now, remembering was survival itself. The moon gate became their secret altar. Not for gods, but for memory. Not for prayers, but for presence. They stood beneath it on silent nights and found the pieces they had lost. A name, a breath, a reason to wait, even in a world that erased everything. Even in a world that renamed love, whispers move faster than footsteps in palaces. They slip between silk and marble cracks. They live in corners, behind folding screens, where silence listens and silence speaks. Ara had learned how to walk carefully, how to smile without revealing her thoughts, how to let questions die behind her lips. But not all glances were blind here. Not all smiles were given in kindness, and not all silence meant safety anymore. One morning, as she poured her tea, a younger concubine leaned just too close. I heard, she whispered, lips barely moving. He looks at you like spring rain. Ara kept her face calm, steady, still. She lifted the cup, hands perfectly steady. But inside, her ribs felt cold and hollow. That evening, she did not visit him. The moon gate waited, but stayed empty. Only the wind passed beneath its arch. White Orchid, too, remained at his post. He felt the air shift in rhythm, as if the walls had grown ears overnight. He polished the lanterns more slowly now, each movement measured, each breath delayed. He watched shadows instead of seeking light. A new eunuch had joined their ranks. Tall, stern, with eyes too calm. He never asked questions, only observed. He walked like someone already knew everything. One night, Ara found her slippers missing. A small thing, a silent warning perhaps. Another time, a note was left torn, half missing. Folded too many times. She said nothing, but her heart heard. The palace was no longer half asleep. It was wide awake and watching closely. Still, their signs continued in smaller ways. A petal under her bowl at lunch. A comb tied with a familiar knot. A flower missing exactly one soft leaf. These became the voices they dared trust, small enough to escape a jealous gaze. But the king was not a fool. He read the wind like trained dogs do, and when the air grew strange and hushed, he summoned his spies in golden silence. That week, no wives were summoned at all. Instead, they stayed within their own quarters, awaiting orders that never seemed to come. Ara watched the sky from her balcony. The stars blinked, but gave no comfort. She missed the stream near her village. Missed bare feet in thick green grass. Missed the way Lin used to laugh, even when there was nothing funny said. White Orchid lit incense outside the library. His hands moved by memory, not thought. He barely slept, barely ate, barely blinked, only listened, only waited, only feared. Then, late one evening, a scroll came. Delivered not to Ara, but her maid. The girl read it and turned pale. Ara took it gently, hands cold again. It was an invitation from the Empress. Tea tomorrow, just the two of them. The Empress rarely summoned lower wives directly, and never without layers of careful meaning. Ara bathed in silence that night. She wore her oldest robe of gray. No jewels, no perfume, just clean dignity. The Empress sat on a low platform, surrounded by cushions and soft white orchids. She gestured calmly, her smile unreadable. Ara bowed, then knelt with folded hands. Tea was served, slow and delicate. The cups were thin as dragonfly wings. The Empress poured first, without a word. Only after 3 sips did she speak. "You walk the garden path quite often." Ara nodded once. "The air is good." "You like the moon gate, I think." Ara's fingers tightened against her robe. "It's peaceful," she said, barely above breath. The Empress did not look at her. She gazed at the orchids instead. "Peace is fragile," she murmured, "and expensive." Ara said nothing. That was the answer. The Empress finally turned her head slightly. "Be careful where you leave your shadow." Then, with a faint wave of hand, she dismissed her without another word. That night, Ara did not sleep. She sat by the window, unmoving. In her lap, a folded paper bird. She didn't release it to the wind. White Orchid waited 2 nights without reply. He left no note, gave no sign, only sat once by the moon gate, until a servant passed and he vanished. But silence could not hold them forever. On the 3rd night she came late. No robe, no slippers, only herself. He was already there, pacing in circles. When he saw her, he stopped breathing. "I thought you were—" She placed one finger to his lips. "I'm not," she said. "Not yet." They didn't cry, didn't kiss, didn't move. Only stood together beneath the round gate, as if time itself would freeze again. He placed something into her hand quietly. A ring made of braided thread and reed. She looked at it for a long time. "It will not fit," she whispered slowly. "Nothing fits anymore. Not even dreams." "But it remembers," he said. "So will we." She curled her fingers around the ring. "I want to stay," she said softly. "I want to break the rules, Lin." He looked down. "Rules already broke us first." They sat together, backs to the stone, shoulders close, hands nearly touching. Not quite. Above them, a single star flickered hard, the kind that burned out too soon. In that moment, they were no longer names given by kings or whispered titles. They were children again. Lovers in silence. two souls beneath one fading piece of sky. The court could look, the walls could listen. But for now, they had this: a breath, a name, a moment unbroken. And sometimes that is enough to survive. The wind was wrong that morning. It blew too fast, too dry, too loud. Even the trees seemed to pull back, as if the palace had changed overnight. Ara rose early, long before the bell. She lit a candle and said nothing. Her hands moved slowly, folding her robe. The thread ring rested near her pillow. Outside, servants whispered behind closed doors. Trays dropped. Brooms clattered. Steps grew quiet. Even the birds avoided the courtyard fountain. Something had happened, or was about to. White Orchid felt it in his ribs. He dressed too carefully, tied knots twice. The sky above the towers was gray, not with clouds, but with waiting. By mid-morning, guards arrived at his door. Not many, just two dressed in blue. They said nothing, just opened the door. He bowed and followed without a word. They led him to a waiting chamber, a cold space with no incense burning, a stone bench, a scroll rack. Silence. He stood, unsure if he should kneel. He didn't. He only lowered his head. A man entered wearing black court robes. He carried no sword, only a ledger. He opened it slowly, fingers pausing twice. "You've been here 6 years," he said. "Served without complaint. Obedient, quiet, trusted." White Orchid nodded, but did not speak. The man looked up, eyes unreadable. "Your name before entering the palace?" White Orchid answered after a breath. "Lin." The man wrote it down, slowly, carefully. "Have you had improper contact with a wife?" His voice was flat, not accusing, not kind. Lin looked down. "No," he said softly. The man paused again. "We have eyes, boy." Another pause. "Do not lie when watched." Lin did not answer. He simply breathed. At last, the man closed the ledger. "You will not serve the inner court again. You are reassigned to kitchen supply duty." Then, with no further word, he left. The guards did not touch Lin once. They simply opened the door and waited. Lin returned to his quarters in silence. He gathered his things. 2 robes, thread. He left the flute. Too dangerous now. Elsewhere, Ara stared at her untouched tea. No maid dared speak to her today. Her favorite comb had gone missing again. A single red thread lay on the floor. She bent, picked it up, breathed deeply. Then she turned to the window, waiting. But he did not appear that night, nor the next, nor the next 3. Finally, on the 4th dusk, he came. Not through the garden, but past the well. His robes were darker, sleeves more worn. His face looked tired, but not broken. They met beneath a twisted banyan tree, farther from the moon gate this time. She stepped forward, but he did not. "They're watching," he said, voice thin. "Even the air feels heavier now." She nodded, folding her hands behind her. "I heard," she said. "They moved you." "I told them nothing," he whispered. "I lied well, but not perfectly." A silence settled between them like ash. "I dreamt we were back by the stream," she said. "Before all of this began." "I dreamt we never left," he replied. They both smiled, then both looked away. She stepped closer, just once. "I want to leave this place, Lin." He looked at her, not with shock, but with sorrow. Deep, familiar sorrow. "And go where?" he asked. "As who?" "As Ara," she said, "even if nowhere." Lin closed his eyes, breathed in slow. "They would hunt us," he finally said. "Even love is treason now, Ara." She reached into her sleeve and paused, then pulled out a folded paper square. Inside, 2 small river stones were hidden. "From the stream," she said. "Still cold." He took them gently, held them tight. "Even now," he whispered, "you remember everything." She looked at the path behind them. A guard's shadow passed beyond the trees. "No more letters," she said. "Too risky." "No more signs," he agreed. "Only memory." They did not hug, did not kiss. only exchanged breath like old promises. Then she stepped back, slowly, eyes soft. "Promise me," she said, "if I disappear." "You won't," he interrupted. "But if I do," she repeated, firmer, "remember me by the rain tree." He nodded once, not trusting his voice. Then she turned and walked away again. Not quickly, not carelessly, just like always. He stood still long after she left, palms pressed together like silent prayer. That night, he placed the stones beside his sleeping mat, beneath folded linen cloth. He didn't light a lantern before sleeping. He wanted the dark to speak honestly. Far away, Ara watched the stars alone. The palace was colder than she remembered. Even the silk on her skin itched. But she still had her name inside. Still had his voice stored in memory. Still carried the sound of river wind. And when she closed her eyes that night, she dreamt not of palaces, but home. The rain tree, the stream, his hands, and how the wind once carried laughter. The walls had ears, and now mouths. Every step echoed longer than it should. Every glance felt like a written confession. Even the wind no longer felt clean. Ara walked slower through the gardens now. Not with fear, but with something heavier. A kind of knowing that settled deep, the way cold settles into old bones. She hadn't seen Lin in 7 days. Not his robes, not his steps, nothing. But she didn't ask. That was dangerous. Questions now were shadows with sharp teeth. She began placing things in order. Her combs, her thimbles, her writing cloth. One by one, folded with care. As if preparing for something unnamed. Her maid noticed the quiet rearranging. She said nothing. She wasn't paid to. White Orchid stayed by the kitchens now. He stirred water, counted bowls, folded towels, but his mind moved in other places. He recited her name like a rhythm. Not out loud. Never out loud. But inside, like breath, like heartbeat. One morning, he found a cloth napkin, folded wrong, edged with 2 tiny cuts. He froze, held it, looked around slowly. No one had seen, or so he hoped. That night he returned to the moon gate. Only briefly, only to leave one thing, a small stone smoothed by fire. He placed it near the southern pillar. A signal. Not loud, but enough. The next afternoon, Ara passed the spot. Her steps were casual, arms loose. She paused to pick a fallen leaf, and saw it. The stone. Warm still. She did not smile. She did not stop. Only walked on, a little steadier now. She understood what he meant. He was still here, still listening. But more than that, he was ready. She returned that evening, beneath soft lantern light. She dropped a yellow petal at the base. He found it the next morning at dawn, tucked it into his sleeve without flinching. They said nothing, wrote nothing. But the wind began to carry something. Not words, not secrets, but preparation. He began collecting scraps of waxed paper, threads, dried fruit, small flint chips, each item hidden beneath floorboards at night. Ara practiced holding her breath longer, counted how many steps from her door to the west gate behind the stables. She traced them in her mind, twice, then erased the thought before it settled. She dared not think too long. 2 nights later, he passed a folded leaf. Inside, no ink, only carved lines. A map etched in the veins themselves. Ara unfolded it beneath her blanket, studied it until dawn touched her walls. Then she burned it in her basin. Ash floated gently, like snow from memory. They were almost ready. Almost. But the court was not blind. That same day, a servant was beaten. No one said why. No one asked. The kitchen spoke in silence afterward. White Orchid moved slower, eyes downcast. He knew that warning was for him. He had lost 1 step in rhythm. And the court always noticed such things. Still, he did not stop. Ara wrote a final letter that night, not on parchment, too easily discovered. She used thread, stitched into fabric lining, a message only he would understand. The next morning, she wrapped it in fruit. Sent it through a passing merchant's boy. Just outside the kitchen, it arrived. He opened it in the back room, ran fingers along the inner seam. One line, made with uneven stitch. Tomorrow, before the bells. South Gate. He folded the cloth, face blank. But his hands shook when alone. That evening, the sky burned orange-red. Clouds like flame across a tired heaven. She sat by her mirror, motionless. Then rose, lit her last stick of incense. It smelled of river grass and childhood. He packed nothing but the thread ring, placed it inside his right slipper's sole. Before sunrise, she left her bed. Her maid stirred, but she said nothing. Out the door, down the hall, barefoot on cold stone, robe unbelted. He was already there, beside the gate. Cloaked in gray, almost invisible in fog. She reached him without a word. He turned. Their eyes met once more. "Ready?" he asked, voice barely a breath. "No," she said, "but I'm coming anyway." They turned from the palace walls together. Not running, not sneaking, just walking. The path was narrow, lined with brush. Twice they paused, hiding from movement, but no one followed. Not yet. At the southern wall, a gap waited. Stone cracked, barely wide enough to pass. He slipped through first, reached out gently. She took his hand and followed. Outside, the world felt enormous again. The air held birdsong. Distant, soft, free. For one moment, they just stood there. No guards, no watchers, no names. "I never thought we'd get this far." "Neither did I," she whispered back. They did not smile, only breathed. One breath, one step. Then another. Far behind, a bell rang at last. But it was too late to matter. The forest greeted them with damp earth. Birdsong hovered high in distant trees. The morning mist clung to their robes. But neither of them spoke about cold. Each step was quiet, careful, steady. They didn't run. Running belonged to fear. And this was not fear, not yet. This was breath. This was breath remembered. Ara moved with her eyes forward, calm. Lin walked behind her, listening for breaks. Every snap of twig, every breeze shift felt like memory trying to follow them. They passed a stream just past noon. Its water was clear, shallow, whispering. Lin cupped his hands and drank slowly. She watched his face, but said nothing. They sat for a while beneath branches. He leaned back against moss-covered stone. She pressed her hands into the grass. Neither had seen green like this in years. "Do you think we're truly gone?" she asked. He opened his eyes slowly, answered, "We're not where we were." "That might be enough," she whispered. They moved again as the sun lowered, farther into trees, past old shrines. They followed no path, only instinct. By dusk, they found a clearing wide with flat ground and crooked stones. A place forgotten, a place unnamed. Here, they stopped and made no fire, only huddled beneath a worn gray cloak. He laid out cloth over cold dirt. She curled beside him, not touching, but their breaths met between still shoulders. Above, the stars crept from hiding. Ara watched them through blinking lashes. "Are you afraid now?" she asked. Lin was silent for a time, then said, "I think I'm allowed to be." She nodded. "Then I'll be afraid too." The night passed without voices or dreams. At dawn, they rose before the birds. Lin walked to gather dry branches. Ara rinsed her hands in dew. A small shelter took shape by noon. Nothing grand, just cloth between trees. Enough to breathe without glancing backward. They spent the day in quiet work. He sharpened sticks. She tied bundles. When they sat, they ate little. But together the silence felt softer now. By the second night, she spoke first. "We need new names," she said. "We left the others behind the wall." Lin stared at the fireless center. "I don't know what else to be," she thought, then smiled faintly. "Then maybe, no name at all." He looked at her, surprised but calm. "A place without names," he repeated. Maybe that's what freedom sounds like. So they became no one, for now. He didn't say Ara again aloud. She didn't say Lin beneath moonlight, but in their hearts those names remained, like roots under quiet, untouched earth. On the third day, rain came suddenly. It fell hard, fast, but without thunder. Their shelter held, barely, cloth soaked through. They sat wrapped in silence and steam. She looked at his soaked shoulders, shivering. He looked at her dripping sleeves. Then, wordlessly, they leaned into each other. Not for warmth, not for safety, but because they could. Her head rested on his shoulder bone, his cheek pressed into her damp hair. They didn't speak. Speaking would have broken it. When the rain stopped, neither moved. The clouds parted. Mist rose like breath. He said softly, "I'm still afraid." She replied, "Then I'll still stay." That night they dried their clothes by wind. Their hands met over knotted rope. Fingers lingered, just long enough to mean. Not love, not yet, but presence. The forest watched without judgment or noise. The stars returned, bold and unblinking. She asked him, "Do you miss the palace?" He shook his head slowly. "I miss safety." She nodded. "But not the silence." "No," he said, "not that silence." They fell asleep side by side again. This time closer. This time breathing together. No guards, no bells, no courtyards, only air and wind, and maybe time. In the days that followed, routine formed. They foraged berries, cleaned old rain pots. Ara repaired their tattered hem with thread. Lin carved symbols into bark for luck. They did not speak of what came next. The road beyond the forest stayed unknown, but they kept walking inside this stillness, this sacred, fragile space they'd stolen back. One morning, Ara found a bird's nest. 2 tiny eggs sat uncracked and warm. She watched the mother return to feed, then backed away without touching anything. She told Lin, and he only smiled. "Some things," he said, "deserve to remain whole." Later, she found his old thread ring. He had laid it near a root. Let the sunlight rest across its center. She picked it up, wore it again. This time not hidden, not afraid. When she looked at him, he bowed. Only slightly, and only with his eyes. That night, they sat beneath wind-stirred trees. Their hands touched, fingers barely entangled. They did not speak, there was no need. The forest listened, and heard no lies. The air around them did not change. But something within them had. Not loudly, not suddenly, but gently. Like breath returned to lungs that had forgotten how to hold it. The wind changed on the 10th morning. It carried the smell of horses and smoke. Not the forest kind, the other kind. The kind that remembered torches and cities. Ara tasted the change before she spoke. She was tying herbs in small bundles. Lin looked up from flint and stone. His hands stilled, his shoulders tensed slowly. "You feel it too?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Something passed through last night." They listened, but the birds were distant. Even the leaves swayed with less rhythm. Ara placed the herbs back into cloth. She folded them slower than before. "We may need to move," she said. He agreed. "But not until we see." They waited 2 days in deeper silence, gathered food, cleaned, watched the far trees. On the 3rd morning, Lin found it. A ribbon, crimson, tied to a branch. It was too clean, too deliberate. And there, at its tip, wax seal. He did not open it in daylight. He brought it to their shelter slowly. Ara took one look and turned away. "That seal," she said. "I remember it." The wax bore the king's court emblem, faintly cracked, pressed against folded parchment. They sat together near dusk to read. He broke the seal with careful fingers. Inside, a single sheet with few words. Ink faded but legible. Sharp, precise brushstrokes. It read, "You are not lost. You are watched. Return, and no punishment will follow. Remain, and consequence will find you both." No name, no signature, just a line. Just red ink dried into empty warning. Ara exhaled slowly through her teeth. She folded the paper, hands not shaking. then dropped it into the flame's edge. They watched it curl, burn, and vanish. "They've found us," Lin said quietly. Ara nodded. "But not yet reached. They did not run that night. They did not hide. Not truly. They sat by the fire, closer now. I thought they'd forgotten," she said. "I hoped they'd stopped caring." He looked at the trees. "They never forget. But sometimes they wait until you do." She rested her head on his shoulder. Neither of them closed their eyes that night. By morning, they began to prepare. This time with quiet resolve, not panic. They packed only what mattered most. 2 cloth bundles, 3 water gourds, the thread ring, a dried plum. "I won't go back," she said. "Even if they promise forgiveness." "They don't forgive," he said. "They collect." They left their shelter behind at dusk. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The forest narrowed, path turning stone gray. Steps felt heavier. Air tasted older. At a stream, they paused to drink. He splashed water onto his face. She leaned down and touched the sand. When she stood, she held something odd. A wooden carving. Small, broken, familiar. Lin took it and studied the edge. "It's from the old shrine," he whispered. "But someone left it freshly carved," she said. "They passed through here not long ago." That night, they slept under a slope. No roof, no walls, just damp air. Ara placed the thread ring on a root, watched the wind shift its tiny shadow. "They still want us to fear," she said. Lin replied, "They don't know we've changed." He held her hand, just for breath, not for comfort, not for promise, just to remember the shape of choice. In dreams, Ara saw palace halls burning, but she stood in the middle, smiling. The next morning, crows flew eastward fast. Lin watched the direction, brow furrowed. "They came from the coast," he said. "Messengers move that fast with news." "Maybe something happened at court," she said. "Maybe the king has fallen ill." "Or worse," he said. "Another wife gone." She shivered, though the sun was high. "Do you think they blame me still?" "Always," he said, "but not aloud." By afternoon, they reached a hilltop clearing. From there, rooftops shimmered in far mist. Not the palace. Another town entirely. No walls, no guards, just sloped roofs. Ara stared at it in silence. "We could pass as travelers," he said. "Find work. Hide among new names." "I don't want new names anymore," she replied. "I want to live with the old ones." He took her hand again, held it. "Then let's keep them," he said, "even if only to ourselves." That night they lit a fire again, a small one, shielded by stones. They spoke about things never spoken before, about her first day in the palace, about his last day with his father, about the stream, the rain tree, and about the day the ribbon came. "When I saw it," she said softly, "I wasn't afraid. I was angry." "Why?" he asked. "Because I knew they still believed they could own me with paper and ink." He nodded. "They only understand ownership." She leaned her head into his neck. "But we have something they'll never write." He asked, "What's that?" "A life," she said. "Not perfect, but ours." The wind stirred again, but more gently, like a breath that had calmed at last. They didn't speak after that moment, only watched the stars above old trees. Red ink had tried to reach them, but it carried no weight anymore. Some messages fade in fire, others wind. But the ones written in memory, those stay, even when the world forgets. The town was small and mostly gray. Stone roofs, dusty paths, quiet water wells. People spoke little, worked early, slept early. Ara and Lin found space behind a shop, a room with thin walls and cold floor. But it was theirs, and it was quiet. They said they were siblings passing through, looking for work, resting from travel. No one questioned them too closely yet. Ara mended robes and stitched for coin. Lin helped an old cook boil rice. They ate sparingly, saved in cloth bundles. Each morning they walked the same path. Never too fast, never too friendly. They learned names, but gave none back. A bell tower stood near the well, tall, cracked. Never once used aloud, but Lin felt it every time he passed. Not in ears, but in ribs. A kind of pressure, a hum inside, like something waiting to speak again. Ara felt it too, though she said nothing. Instead, she folded rice paper into birds. "Sometimes silence feels louder than thunder," she said. He nodded. "And weighting heavier than walls." At night, they shared a single blanket. 2 breaths, always close, never quite touching. But their hands sometimes met beneath cloth. Accidental. Intentional. Both at once. Lin carved a comb from driftwood, gave it to her without ceremony. She smiled, touched it, said only, "It remembers the stream." He nodded. "So do we." One morning, a rider passed through town. Fast. Covered in red silk and dust. He stopped for water. Took none. Left behind the smell of polished metal. That evening, Ara said, "They're moving again." Lin agreed. "The palace reaches farther each time." They didn't pack. Not yet. But they stopped walking near the tower. Instead, they kept to shadowed alleys. Avoided light after the second bell. Then, one night, Lin woke sharply. No sound, no cry. But something shifted. He rose and walked outside the door. The air was thick, unmoving, dry. The tower loomed black against starless sky, and though it stood still, he heard it. A ringing. Not through ears, but soul. A tremble in bone, in memory. He returned inside, pale and silent. Ara sat up. "What was it?" He shook his head. It didn't speak. "But it wanted to," she answered. They didn't sleep again that night. Next morning, townspeople spoke of bad dreams, of storms with no wind, fires with no flame. One woman said she heard the tower. No one believed her, but no one laughed. Ara folded another bird, this one black. She placed it on the windowsill, watching. A child knocked on their door by noon. He held a basket of wilted herbs. "From my grandmother," he said. No message. Inside the herbs, a thread of red, not long, not fresh, but unmistakable. Ara turned to Lin. Said nothing. He understood. The bell had spoken quietly. That evening they left by back street. Left the comb. Left the stitched bag. Only took thread, 2 coins, their names. They did not run. They did not hide. They walked like silence wearing shoes. Past the edge of town, a field. Beyond that, hills they'd never seen before. They crossed under clouds with no wind. Even trees stood still, unsure, uneasy. By dusk, they reached a hollow path. They made camp beside a stone root. No fire, no speech, only closeness. Lin held her hand openly now. She let him, resting her head again. "I miss the weight of dreaming," she said. He replied, "Then let's dream here, a little." The stars came late, blinking one by one. Ara whispered, "Do you still hear it?" Lin paused, then answered, "Not anymore. But I think someone else will soon." She closed her eyes. "Let it ring. Maybe someone else is ready now." They fell asleep before the moon rose. And in the town, beneath the tower, a boy watched as the wind returned. He blinked once, then heard it. Faint. A bell that did not move or shine, but rang somewhere deep without sound. The hills rolled like sleeping beasts ahead. Grass waved softly, unaware of danger. Birds sang as if nothing had changed, but something had. In the air, in the way the shadows shifted faster. Lin walked slightly ahead this time. He knew the terrain was unfamiliar now. They had passed the last known village. What lay ahead had no name yet. Ara followed, slower than before. She looked back more often than usual. Behind them, no riders, no flags, nothing. But silence doesn't always mean safety. They stopped by a river near sundown. Not wide, but too deep to cross. The water moved slow, thick with dusk. They knelt beside it and drank carefully, then sat in silence, shoulder to shoulder. "We can't stay here," Lin said quietly. "They'll reach the hills before long." Ara nodded, tracing circles in dirt. "But the fire hasn't reached us yet." He looked up. "It will." She didn't cry. She hadn't in weeks. But her fingers clenched the grass tightly. That night, the sky was cloudless again. They made a ring of small stones. No fire. Just shape. Just memory. Lin placed the thread ring in the middle, watched moonlight settle on its edge. "I wish we could bury it here," he whispered, "and not have to return." Ara replied, "It wouldn't stay buried long." He glanced at her. She was right. They slept with their heads pressed close. Every small sound tightened Lin's shoulders. At dawn, they crossed the river downstream. A fallen tree bridged the narrow bend. He tested it, then guided her across. She did not hesitate. She didn't look down. Once across, they kept walking uphill. Each step felt harder than the last. By midday, smoke rose far to south. Not much, just a thin gray line. Ara saw it first, said nothing. Lin stopped when the scent reached them. Old wood, cloth, distant flame. "They're burning something," he said. "Maybe signs." Ara whispered, "Maybe the town." Neither spoke for many steps after. The air thickened. Even the trees paused. The sun no longer felt warm. Near twilight, they reached an abandoned shrine. Half fallen, covered in vines and yellow moss. They sat at its base, backs resting. Lin reached into his robe's side pocket, pulled out a folded piece of cloth. "I've carried this since the beginning," he said. Ara took it gently, unfolded it. Inside, a locket made of stone twine. Not precious, not heavy, just real. He looked away. "It was for you." She smiled. "It still is." She tied it to her sash slowly. The shrine creaked in the wind above. Then, from behind them, faint crackling. Not close, not near, but too close. Smoke again. This time drifting toward them. Branches snapping in unnatural rhythm. "They're setting fire to the forest," Ara said. Lin stood. "To flush us out." She stood too. "Then we don't wait." They ran, not wildly, but focused. Downhill, left at the rock's edge, into tall grass, along dry roots. The fire was behind them, hungry. Smoke curled through low leaves and branches. Flames not yet seen, but imagined. Their breath came hard and sharp now. Every step stolen from waiting heat. Ara stumbled once. Lin caught her wrist, didn't speak, just pulled her forward faster. The river reappeared by moon's edge, wider now, deeper than before. No bridge, no tree, only water. They paused, chest heaving with smoke. Ara looked behind, then looked at him. "If we cross, we disappear," she said. "If we don't, we're already gone." Lin stepped into the water first, cold, fast, pulling at his leg. He turned, reached back for her hand. She took it, stepped in beside him. The current fought, but they moved forward, breath by breath, step by step. He held her tighter near the center. She gasped once, slipped, but didn't fall. They reached the far bank together, collapsed onto wet stones, coughing hard. The firelight had not crossed yet, but the wind carried its voice forward. Sparks would come by morning, they knew. But for now, water protected them. They lay side by side, hands linked. "I'm tired of running," she said. Lin replied, "Then we find higher ground." She turned to him. "And after that?" He hesitated. "Then we stop running." Above them, the stars shimmered like old songs. No bells, no ribbons, just night. The forest behind them still whispered fire, but they were no longer part of it. The climb began before the sun rose. Dew clung to their sleeves like breath. Each step pressed their bodies into silence. They spoke little. There was nothing urgent, only the steady sound of feet on stone. The mountain rose slowly, not too steep, but long, like memory stretched in rock. Ara paused often to catch her breath. Lin waited without saying a word. Above them, birds circled and called faintly. Not warnings, not greetings, just presence. By midday, the trees began to thin. More light, more wind, more sky. They passed a crooked cairn of stones. Someone had come here once before. Ara placed a twig at its base. Lin added a small white feather. The mountain accepted both without comment. They stopped for water at a ledge. Below, the world shimmered in quiet green. Ara stared a long time without speaking, then said, "It looks peaceful from here." Lin nodded. Maybe it always was. They climbed again, higher into thinner air. Their hands scraped stone. Their legs ached. But they didn't slow. They only breathed. At last, near evening, they reached the top. Not a peak, but a flat rise, ringed by stone, quiet, open, sacred. They stood at the center and looked around. Nothing moved except the mountain wind. A single stone stood taller than others, flat-faced, weathered, carved with no words. Ara walked to it and knelt slowly. Her hand brushed its face with care. "It feels like it remembers," she said, "even if it forgets the names." Lin joined her, resting one palm beside hers. "It doesn't need names," he said softly. "It just knows we were here." They sat at its base and listened. No birds, no leaves, just mountain. That night, they lit a small fire. The flames danced low, respectful, calm. They warmed their hands in shared silence. Ara reached into her sash and pulled the thread ring from its cloth wrap. She held it up between them both, then gently placed it on the stone. Lin didn't speak, he only watched. "It's not a goodbye," she said. "It's a promise we already kept." He nodded. "We found what we lost." The fire cracked softly in approval. She leaned against his side and sighed. "I wonder if the palace ever knew we were never theirs to keep." "They knew," he said. "They just forgot." Above them, stars bloomed one by one, each pulse like a step back home. Lin reached for her hand and held it, this time without fear, without secrecy. Ara smiled, closed her eyes, breathed deep. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. He kissed her knuckles. Barely a touch. "Neither am I," he replied. In the dark, their fire grew small, but its light held steady until morning. They did not speak of next steps, only listened as the wind passed through. When dawn came, they woke to stillness. Clouds moved low but did not fall. The air felt full, but light. Ara stood first, brushing off her robe, then turned to face the wide horizon. Below, valleys stretched without end or wall. No towers, no bells, no red ink. Lin stepped beside her, hair loose again, his eyes clearer than she had seen. "We could stay," she said, "or keep walking." He smiled. "Maybe both." They packed slowly, leaving nothing but presents. Before they left, Ara returned to the stone. She traced a circle with her thumb. "I don't need it to remember me," she said, "but I hope it does." Lin placed a folded paper bird beside it. Its wings spread, ready but resting. Then they turned, side by side again, walking down the path they'd never known. No map, no sign, just direction. The wind behind them carried no fire, only the breath of something finally finished. And far behind, on that quiet peak, the stone stood still beneath a cloud, watching, remembering, saying nothing. The climb began before the sun rose. Dew clung to their sleeves like breath. Each step pressed their bodies into silence. They spoke little. There was nothing urgent, only the steady sound of feet on stone. The mountain rose slowly, not too steep, but long, like memory stretched in rock. Ara paused often to catch her breath. Lin waited without saying a word. Above them, birds circled and called faintly. Not warnings, not greetings, just presence. By midday, the trees began to thin. More light, more wind, more sky. They passed a crooked cairn of stones. Someone had come here once before. Ara placed a twig at its base. Lin added a small white feather. The mountain accepted both without comment. They stopped for water at a ledge. Below, the world shimmered in quiet green. Ara stared a long time without speaking, then said, "It looks peaceful from here." Lin nodded. Maybe it always was. They climbed again, higher, into thinner air. Their hands scraped stone. Their legs ached. But they didn't slow. They only breathed. At last, near evening, they reached the top. Not a peak, but a flat rise, ringed by stone, quiet, open, sacred. They stood at the center and looked around. Nothing moved except the mountain wind. A single stone stood taller than others, flat-faced, weathered, carved with no words. Ara walked to it and knelt slowly. Her hand brushed its face with care. "It feels like it remembers," she said, "even if it forgets the names." Lin joined her, resting one palm beside hers. "It doesn't need names," he said softly. "It just knows we were here." They sat at its base and listened. No birds, no leaves, just mountain. That night, they lit a small fire. The flames danced low, respectful, calm. They warmed their hands in shared silence. Ara reached into her sash and pulled the thread ring from its cloth wrap. She held it up between them both, then gently placed it on the stone. Lin didn't speak, he only watched. "It's not a goodbye," she said. "It's a promise we already kept." He nodded. "We found what we lost." The fire cracked softly in approval. She leaned against his side and sighed. "I wonder if the palace ever knew we were never theirs to keep." "They knew," he said. "They just forgot." Above them, star bloomed one by one, each pulse like a step back home. Lin reached for her hand and held it, this time without fear, without secrecy. Ara smiled, closed her eyes, breathed deep. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. He kissed her knuckles. Barely a touch. "Neither am I," he replied. In the dark, their fire grew small, but its light held steady until morning. They did not speak of next steps, only listened as the wind passed through. When dawn came, they woke to stillness. Clouds moved low but did not fall. The air felt full but light. Ara stood first, brushing off her robe, then turned to face the wide horizon. Below, valleys stretched without end or wall, no towers, no bells, no red ink. Lin stepped beside her, hair loose again, his eyes clearer than she had seen. "We could stay," she said, "or keep walking." He smiled. "Maybe both." They packed slowly, leaving nothing but presents. Before they left, Ara returned to the stone. She traced a circle with her thumb. "I don't need it to remember me," she said, "but I hope it does." Lin placed a folded paper bird beside it, its wings spread, ready but resting. Then they turned, side by side again, walking down the path they'd never known. No map, no sign, just direction. The wind behind them carried no fire, only the breath of something finally finished. And far behind, on that quiet peak, the stone stood still beneath a cloud, watching, remembering, saying nothing. They walked for days without counting time. Fields passed. Trees thickened, then thinned again. Rain came once, light and almost kind. They didn't speak of where they'd go. Not yet, not while silence still held. Their hands stayed close with every step, sometimes brushing, sometimes holding, sometimes apart. But the space between them never grew. They slept beneath branches, heads touching cloth, woke with birds, shared tea and crumbs. The world outside felt wide but quiet. No bells, no banners, no names called. Ara often paused to watch the sky. Lin watched her more than the road. One evening they came upon a stream, shallow, clear, with tiny smooth stones. They sat at its edge for hours. Didn't drink, didn't move, just watched water. Ara traced circles in the wet sand. Lin built small towers from rounded rocks. At last, she said, "Do you remember the first time we spoke of leaving?" He nodded. "You said you'd wait for me." "I meant it," she said. "I still do." He looked at her, unsure how to answer. She added, "Even now when we've left?" He smiled faintly. "Then maybe we never left. Maybe we only arrived somewhere else." She leaned back on her hands, exhaling. "The palace changed everything," she said. "But not the way I thought." He waited, let her choose the words. "I thought it stole something from us." She glanced at him. "But we gave it." He looked down at his hands. "And yet it couldn't hold what we kept." Ara nodded. "That's what I never said." Lin asked, "What else haven't you said?" She looked at the sky, thoughtful. "That I love you," she answered quietly. "That I always did. Even when angry." His breath caught. He looked away quickly. Not from shame, just from weight. "I knew," he said. But hearing it, he didn't finish the sentence. She let it sit between them, soft. Then she added, "What haven't you said?" Lin picked up one of the smooth stones, rolled it in his palm, slowly. "That I still dream of the rain tree." He paused. "And that I miss my voice." Ara's head turned. "Your voice?" "The one I lost when I changed." She reached for his hand without hesitation, held it tightly, stone between their palms. "I still hear it," she whispered. "Then let me borrow your ears," he said. "Just long enough to speak again." She smiled and nodded once. They sat that way until stars blinked. No more words passed between them. But none were needed now? Not yet. The next morning, they moved toward a village. Small, smoke curling gently from chimneys. A woman there gave them bread. Her eyes kind, her questions few. "You came from far?" she asked. "We're just passing," Ara answered softly. The woman nodded. "Then may you pass safe." They stayed one night in a wooden barn, slept on straw, wrapped in old blankets. In the dark, Ara reached for him. He turned to face her completely. "I didn't say it to burden you." He shook his head. "It freed me." She touched his cheek with careful fingers, and he didn't flinch. He only closed his eyes, as if memory lived there. "I never kissed you," she said softly. "Not when we were young," he replied. "And not after," she added, voice low. He nodded once. "We were always waiting." "Should we still wait?" she asked. He didn't answer, only leaned forward. Their foreheads touched like in years past. Then slowly, with breath not yet steady, they kissed, gently like a beginning again. No fire, no rush, just truth. When they pulled back, no words followed, only breath and closeness and peace. That night, sleep came slower than usual, but it came with no fear. In the morning, they left the village, back to the path, wind at shoulders. They didn't speak of what they shared, didn't name it, didn't need to. It lived now in the way they walked. Balanced, aligned, unhurried. Somewhere ahead, a lake waited for them, a place no one knew to search. But before they reached it, they paused by a tree. Tall, unfamiliar, blooming. Ara placed her hand upon its trunk, closed her eyes, whispered something Lin couldn't hear. He asked, "What did you say?" She smiled. "I just told it everything." "Did it understand?" "I think it's too old to forget." They kept walking, side by side, quiet, and what was never spoken before now lived inside everything they did. The lake came quietly into view, blue-gray, wide, wrapped in early mist. No boats, no bridges, no watchers. They stood on a ridge above it, the path behind them half covered in weeds. Ara stepped closer to the water's edge. Her shoes sank slightly into soft earth. She didn't mind. She didn't move. Lin stood beside her, silent, still. The lake reflected both their silhouettes faintly. A breeze stirred, brushing her loose hair. She closed her eyes and listened long. "It's quiet enough to speak now," she said. Lin nodded. "And safe enough to remember." They sat by the bank, knees touching. The lake did not disturb their peace. Ara reached into her small cloth bag, pulled out something wrapped in old silk, a stone, flat, smooth, and fire-darkened. "The one from the moon gate," she said. Lin took it gently, thumb tracing its face. "I almost forgot how warm it was." She smiled. "Even stones remember when we forget." They passed it back and forth again, as if weighing old time between palms. Then Lin spoke, barely above the wind. "Do you remember what they used to call me?" Ara looked down, hesitant, then answered, "White Orchid." He nodded. "That name never belonged to me," she asked softly. "What name did?" He said nothing at first, only watched the ripples shift like skin over memory. Then, slowly, without fear, he said, "Lin." She repeated it, once, gently. Then again, this time with breath. "Lin." He closed his eyes, held still. "No one said it since the gate." "You did," she whispered. "With your eyes." He laughed softly. "That's not the same." "Then let me say it again," she said. And she did. "Lin." It came like a thread, pulled loose from years of silence wrapped in robes. They sat that way for a while, just his name between them like firelight. Then she said hers, unasked. "Ara." He turned toward her. "I never forgot it." "I did," she said. "Sometimes for safety. But now? Now I want it back," she answered. They placed their names on the earth, scratched gently into wet sand by hand. Ara, Lin. Not deep, not permanent, but present, just for now. He asked, "What do we do with them?" She replied, "Say them, then let them go." He hesitated. "Let them go?" She smiled. "We'll carry them differently now." He nodded, slowly understanding. They stood again, stretching sore legs. The lake remained still, wind soft. Overhead, clouds wandered, but never gathered. Lin took a small pebble and held it, then whispered, "Lin, one final time." He tossed the stone into the lake. It skipped twice, then vanished beneath surface. Ara did the same. One breath. "Ara," she said, almost laughing as it left. Her stone landed once, then dropped silently. They stood without names for a moment, but not without each other. "Never that." He asked, "Do we still know ourselves?" She reached for his hand. "Yes, because now no one else does." The answer felt light yet full, like a name you choose, not inherit. Together, they followed the lake's curving edge, step by step, tracing forgotten animal trails. Somewhere beyond the bend, smoke curled upward, not black, not urgent. Cooking smoke, maybe. They didn't rush. They no longer needed. Before reaching it, they stopped once more, at a tree stump, moss-covered and wide. Ara sat first, pulling him beside her. "Do you regret anything?" she asked plainly. He shook his head. Only the waiting. "Not the pain?" "No," he said. "Even the pain carried you." She rested her head on his shoulder. The light around them softened to gold. A sparrow landed nearby, then flew again. Lin spoke once more, slow and clear. "If I could choose again, even knowing—" "I'd still choose you," Ara said. Their hands stayed joined, quiet and sure. No tremble, no hiding, only skin. When the trees opened again, they entered. A village, new, unmarked, unfamiliar. Children laughed. Old men played stones. Dogs barked but wagged their tails. No one stared too long. No one asked too much. They passed through like travelers always do, but something in them had changed shape. Names no longer weighed down their backs. Only memory did, and even that was softer now, like worn thread. They found a place near a stream, rented a room above a quiet mill. When the sun set, they lit a lamp, hung a cloth to dry by window. Outside, frogs called from reed banks. Inside, Ara spoke. "Tomorrow we stay," Lin replied. "And the day after? We'll stay again," she smiled. "Until we don't." The stream beside the mill sang softly, its rhythm steady, never too loud. It carried leaves, feathers, bits of light. Ara opened the window each morning, let the air wander through old cloth. Lin swept the floor with careful strokes. He counted patterns in the wood grains. They lived like this, quiet, invisible, real. The room was small, but enough. It had one bed, one chair, and a table worn smooth by years. No one asked where they came from. No one questioned why they stayed. The town forgot to notice them, and in that forgetting, gave them peace. Ara helped in a weaving shop nearby. She tied thread with fingers, patient and sure. Lin worked at the mill each morning. He hauled sacks, fixed the gears. They met for tea in the afternoons, always under the same crooked tree. No words were ever wasted there. Some days they spoke, some days not. But always they stayed beside each other. Time passed like soft wind through grass. Not fast, not slow, just forward. One evening, Ara stood in the doorway. She watched dusk fold into the trees. Lin sat inside, trimming small branches. The fire crackled but did not roar. She turned and asked, "Are we safe?" He paused, then nodded. Safe enough to rest. And they did. For many seasons, they watched fields change color with moonlight, watched children grow tall and confident. The world outside moved as it wished, but inside their little home, stillness lived. They hung no banners, made no vows, only small things: tea, warmth, touch. One winter, Lin caught a fever. He stayed in bed for several days. Ara cooled his skin with river cloth, sang lullabies from when they were small. He recovered slowly, bones thinner, breath shorter, but his eyes held nothing of fear. When he stood again, she wept alone, not from sorrow, but quiet relief. They never spoke of death directly, but it was there, behind soft smiles. Not cruel, not distant, just waiting, kindly. One spring, Ara planted a tiny garden. Mint, garlic, and sinsinkai garlic, onion, something that might bloom. Lin carved markers for each row. He shaped them like birds in flight. "Why birds?" she asked one morning. "They always know where to go," he said. She kissed his cheek without a word. Years folded themselves behind their shoulders gently. No war touched their gate, no kings called. They became part of the place itself. One boy began bringing bread weekly. He never asked why they were different. He only smiled, then ran away. Lin gave him buttons carved from bone. Ara gave stories, short, strange, true. The town began to notice them softly. Not with noise, but with warmth. A chair left by the door. A scarf offered before snow. One evening, Lin sat by the fire. His fingers curled inward, slower than before. Ara sat across, mending an old robe. He looked at her a long while, then said, "If I forget, remind me." She asked, "Of what?" "That we loved well," he whispered. She nodded, eyes bright with knowing. "I will remind you every day." That night, rain fell gently on roof tiles. It sang a song older than them. They fell asleep hand in hand, warm. And when morning came, only Ara woke. She sat beside him, not speaking. Watched his stillness, the peace in it. No panic, no tears, just silence. The kind that holds, not breaks. She opened the window to let in sky, then pressed her forehead to his shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you for staying this far." She did not light a candle. He had never liked small flames near wind. Instead, she placed the bird-shaped marker in the center of the table, facing east. The town understood without being told. They brought her soup, sat with her. They didn't ask questions. They only stayed. Time passed again, as it always does. Ara remained in the house by the stream. She mended, she taught, she sometimes sang. Children came to hear her tell stories. Of a palace, a forest, a boy. Of names that were once forgotten, then remembered just in time. She never claimed the tales as truth. She only told them with quiet eyes. And when she grew older, slower, stiller, the town built her a new chair, wide, soft, with carvings of flowing water. One morning she didn't rise at dawn. The fire had long since burned out, but her hands rested gently on her lap, and the window was open just enough. The wind moved through her gray hair softly, as if to carry something tender home. The stream kept singing, quiet, unwavering, endless. No monument was raised in her name. No scrolls recorded the lives they lived. But in the garden, the birds still came, and the mint grew wild, strong, alive. If you visit that village and ask, they might point to a quiet house. Say, "They were here, a long time." No more, no less, just that. And in the soft dirt near the stream, 2 stones rest beneath the old tree. Not marked, not named, just remembered. And so, the story ends. Not with thunder, not with weeping, but with a silence that holds everything. A boy who was broken by command. A girl who was taken by fate. 2 names once lost, then softly returned. They lived not for vengeance nor glory, but for each other, in quiet ways. They built nothing grand, raised no walls, carried no banners, but in the space between their hands, a world was born, fragile, real, and free. Let history forget their names if it must, but let the wind remember how gently they chose each other, how fiercely they held on, even when they had to let go. Because some stories do not need to be loud to leave something behind. Some stories, like this one, simply ask to be remembered by the heart, and nothing else.